it would be really cool if there was like a big siren in the middle of every facility that just like whoop whoop, we're going into curtailment or something like that. But it's a little less exciting than that.
Welcome back to the Compass Mining Podcast. My name is Jarrett, and today I have Tatum Cave back on the podcast to talk about the 3 things you should know about curtailment. Tatum, how are you doing?
I am doing well. It is finally getting out of the colder temperatures, so things are looking a little different environmentally for the mines, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today.
Let's just dive right in. And I also want to say for anyone listening, if you're watching on YouTube, I'm going to put the link up here. I'll put it in the episode description. We just updated our What is Curtailment educational video, which actually has to do with probably number 2 today that we're going to talk about. But before we get into that, let's talk about just briefly, what is curtailment? Tatum, break it down.
So curtailment looks different for different grids. It has to do with the relationship between the power grid and the mining facility, whoever's operating there. And curtailment is basically, in the most simplistic terms, is Bitcoin miners are basically giving back power to the grid if they need it in a certain period of time where the grid is straining for whatever reason. And a lot of that is due to temperatures. And we can talk about that more in a little bit. But curtailment is very unique for Bitcoin mining data centers versus other ones like cloud services, AI, things like that. Because if you shut down, say, one of OpenAI's data centers, then ChatGPT won't work for you. If you shut down one of Amazon's AWS data centers, then your website is not going to work. If you shut down a Bitcoin mining facility because of curtailment, then you just lose a little bit of profit and revenue that you would be getting if you were hashing. But because you're doing that, you're donating your power back, you're getting power credits to the facility. So that's something very unique to Bitcoin miners, because Bitcoin miners are able to do that within the course of 10 minutes. They can shut down the entire facility, part of the facility, and then turn it right back up, all within, if someone says, hey, we need to curtail, then boom, the site is curtailing within 5-10 minutes, something like that. Then, hey, we're good to come out of curtailment. Everything's back hashing within 10-15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, that flexible load that you talk about is an industry competitive advantage, I think, when it comes to how we're able to partner with the grid, kind of with a symbiotic relationship to say, when you guys need it, we're there to help you out. And you almost touched upon the second part that I want to dive into. And I almost touched upon it when I kind of gave the intro, but you talked about when the grid needs energy. Can you talk to me about the 2 times when the grid probably needs energy back?
The most common one that you'll see is when it's extremely hot outside. So summer in the States is what we kind of unofficially dub curtailment season. However, you will also see it on the other end of the spectrum when it's extremely cold. Not usually as much, but it definitely is there. But if you think about it, when it's really hot outside, especially in Texas, where, we have a ton of Bitcoin mining facilities, both Compass and tons of other companies that are mining out in West Texas, it gets hot out there. And people who are not mining, they're turning on their air conditioners, and they're consuming a lot more electricity to stay cool, whether it's just them as individuals in their house or, businesses, industrial scale. Everything is trying to cool down, putting that strain on the power. Hey, we need more power on our grid. Bitcoin miners, can you all shut down for a little bit? Yep, no problem. Not a problem whatsoever. We'll shut everything down. You're good. Let us know when you're back up. And then maybe, around when the sun starts going down, you'll start seeing those facilities come back online. On the other end of the spectrum, the extreme cold, a couple of years ago, Bitcoin miners actually were pretty directly responsible to saving the lives of a ton of Texans whenever there was that big Arctic vortex that came through and the whole state basically froze over, and it spread beyond Texas, but Texas was a huge part of that because so many mining facilities were there and so much energy was being consumed across the entire grid. And miners were like, yeah, we're totally fine doing that. Here's some of our power. Grid gets balance. Miners get paid from the power company to shut their facility off, and everyone is happy. Eventually, it was still very, bleak and a grim time for the whole world, but that's basically the two major ends of curtailment. You'll see it pop up throughout the year, whether it's hot or cold or in between, but those are the major times that you'll see it.
Yeah, thanks for calling that out, because I think that people do traditionally think about curtailment as this is going to happen in the dog days of summer. It's going to happen when everyone goes to turn on their AC units. And we just updated the educational video that's also up online. It's a 2-minute video, and this is kind of a compliment. This conversation we're having today is a compliment to that. But we definitely wanted to say it can happen in both the extreme heat and the extreme cold. And like you said, it can happen other times throughout the year, but those are typically the times. But I do think traditionally people think about it and they're like, oh, it probably happens in the summer. But it can also happen in the cold. What are some challenges just in general? We're getting a little bit outside of what we know, the 3 things you should know about curtailment. What are some of the other challenges that you see in the extreme cold? Because I think in the extreme heat, I don't know, I feel like maybe that's a little bit more obvious, but like, is the snow blocking some of the filtration? Is something freezing that shouldn't be freezing that we have to be considering? I know that you've talked a lot about, and Shannon has talked about, and Brad has talked about on Talk Mining Tuesdays, our X space, which everyone should join on Tuesdays at 8 p.m. on X, that when it's really cold, sometimes you even have to like heat up things before you just start plugging stuff in so you don't have issues. Like, what are some of the other challenges in the cold? Just as we're in the cold now and we're kind of getting out into the summer, I know we're in March now, but what are some challenges you've seen at facilities in the cold, in and around curtailment times when it gets really cold?
The cold sucks, period, for Bitcoin mining. It's cold deployments are some of the worst for various reasons, and it kind of is symbiotic with it. It's shared struggles with curtailment in the cold. For instance, cabling is just more difficult. Cables will stiffen up because that's how, as it gets colder, molecules they tense up. They don't move as much, and so when you have those 1 or 2 foot splitters that you're plugging into amp miners, those will just rattle out, and you cannot. And then it starts hurting your fingers really bad too. That sometimes happens with curtailment as well. But typically when curtailment happens, everything should always be cabled. But if something happens within that time frame, that's just enough on the cold side for things to maybe cool down to where, things may start rattling out. One of our facilities that we deployed in the middle of January in single digit temperatures, whenever we would go into curtailment, the cords would literally rattle out of the miners, and we would have to go individually find them and plug them back in. And there's mitigations around that. One of the biggest things, though, with curtailment in the winter is if a machine is hashing and then it stops hashing, it will need to reach a certain temperature. Basically, it's essentially warming up in the most literal sense. And sometimes those ambient temperatures that are colder than, regular room temperature might be too cold. We've seen some S21 models not be able to, it's too cold for it to even boot up. And so sometimes you will need to actually heat up a cold side of a container if you want to boot stuff back up. It's the craziest thing. We're still experimenting with all the different models and different firmwares to see where we can kind of make a easy way of mitigating all of that. And we haven't seen it too entirely much, but with new form factors coming and new materials being used on the S21 Plus, we don't know what it's all going to look like. But another thing that happens is when machines go offline and come back up, you might see more errors popping up. For some reason, the way Bitcoin miners work is that if a miner's not working and you unplug it and plug it back in, it might start working. Same thing happens if it's working and you unplug it, plug it back in, it might stop working for various reasons. So that's just something, it's minimal, but something that does happen with curtailment, both in cold and hot temperatures.
Yeah, thanks for sharing some of those things. I just assume that they each have their unique challenges. And I think sometimes in the winter, when people see curtailment, they're kind of thrown off. So it's good to know that, yes, the winter can bring its own challenges, which also can lead to curtailment. It makes sense as everyone's turning on their heat. Now, back in September of 2023, I was in Texas and I was with some Compass employees and I was able to see a couple of the facilities. And I remember being in Houston when it felt like there was a curtailment period because I was at a mine and all of a sudden it was like, yep, the mine had to turn off. And at that point, I was very early in my Bitcoin mining journey. I think I had been with Compass for maybe a week or two, and I wasn't really in tune with what curtailment is or was. So can you kind of talk to me about what the status is or like the modus operandi for when curtailment happens at a specific facility? And then also, is it different at different facilities? The story in my head is there's not one thing, the silver bullet for all facilities.
Compass Mining makes Bitcoin mining accessible to everyone. Whether you're investing in one machine or thousands, our customizable solutions are tailored to meet your needs. We are your experts in Bitcoin mining, offering a platform where individuals and businesses can purchase hardware, host machines, and access a range of ancillary services. Start mining in as little as 48 hours with our turnkey hardware online and mining directly to your Bitcoin wallet within 2 business days. Discover more at compassmining.io and see how we can power your success.
Yeah, every facility, I won't say every, but just about every facility does have some sort of unique agreement with the power company. And so it will look different for just about every single facility. Sometimes it's a text from the site operator in a group chat. Sometimes it's scheduled a week in advance on an email. Sometimes it's a quick phone call like, hey, by the way, we're about to go down right now. Most of the time, though, it's kind of curtailment will happen without it being planned more times than being planned. And it would be really cool if there was like a big siren in the middle of every facility that just like whoop whoop, we're going into curtailment or something like that. But it's a little less exciting than that. And there are things that you're able to do while a site is in curtailment that you would still be able to do if machines are hashing, but it does limit you of what you're able to do depending on your goals at your facility for whatever day it is. Like we've been going out to one of our Texas facilities doing a big repair blitz on some miners that are needing repairs. If we go into curtailment, the amount of repairs that we can do or at least identify significantly goes down because those miners are not hashing. So we don't know what their errors are or if they even have errors. We can't individually go through every log of a miner that just shut down because of curtailment or whatever. So it will halt you for a little bit, but there's still other things that you can do. Basic TLC, that's also a really good point that whenever curtailment does happen, it kind of forces you to do other just basic things around your facility to keep it up to par. Because if you're just running around chasing repairs all day, you're going to let your site get messy. You're going to let things kind of go by the wayside. And it kind of forces you to look at those things that you've kind of been putting off a little bit. That's a really niche thing to think about curtailment with, but it really is like, some days when you're out on a facility, every single day you're chasing repairs, especially in deployment, because some of these miners are damaged in transit, they're used or something like that. And it's like, hey, pump the brakes. Let's do an inventory of how many parts we have. Let's see what kind of tools we have on site, what we need for the future, yada yada.
Yeah, that's something to definitely take into account, the like knock-on effects that, okay, well, if our miners are down for the next 2 hours while we help with the grid, what are the other things that we've had on our to-do list but haven't been able to get in front of because we've been doing fan repairs, we've been taking miners down, there's been some kind of a other situation that we've needed to handle that we just can't figure out. The way I think about a mine is like, if you have 300 miners in a container, it's like you're like looking after, I don't know, this may be a little weird, but it's like you're at an amusement park and you're looking after a chaperone of like about 12 kids or 14 kids, and they're constantly moving around and constantly doing things. And that's a lot of moving parts. And so when you have any downtime to then be able to look at other stuff, I think that that's super important. wanted to ask, is there an analogy or something of a metaphor that you use when you talk about curtailment with someone who's maybe new to Bitcoin mining, or like what's been the best way maybe it's been explained to you? I'm always just trying to increase and improve my messaging and my communication around these things. And I think many people get the idea of like, okay, the grid needs the energy. And I think you talked about ERCOT, I believe back in 2020 when they had that freeze. It's like, okay, ERCOT needed some energy. So Bitcoin shut down and that allowed them to be able to, solve some different problems. But is there any easy way for you to explain this to someone who maybe has never thought about Bitcoin mining, HPC, the idea of using energy for data?
Yeah, I actually had this conversation recently with a friend of mine who's curious about just data centers in general. And every data center looks different, even things within the same industry. As in, when I say that, I mean talking about AWS versus OpenAI versus Compass Mining, and then even other mining facilities, other AI data centers, other cloud services. But the way that they work is that you have someone like me, for instance, who has a bajillion miners that I need a ton of energy for. And so I go up to, I get all this plan. I'm like, hey, Jarrett, you got this land over there. Let me put this here. We'll, make a little deal. I'll pay you whatever. And then I go up to the power grid who let's call it Shannon. He's a power grid. And I go up to Shannon and I say, hey man, look, I see that, you have a little extra energy to offer because your power grid is only utilizing about, I don't know, arbitrary numbers here, 75% of what you can produce. He's like, yeah, sure. I'll give you some power. And so I take maybe 10% of his power. He's got 85% utilization of his power grid. And I'm there. You're happy. I'm happy. We're making Bitcoin. Everything is A-okay. This is great. Why am I getting a phone call from Shannon right now? Hey, Shannon, what's going on? Hey, Tatum, look, I know that we talked about this. I gave you 10% of that power. Well, look, right now I'm at 100%. And there are people calling me. They're like, dude, we're hot. We need to turn our AC on and we can't. And they're saying, hey, we have a hospital to run. I need you to give me back that 10%. I will give you some money in place of that. Oh, yeah, sure, dude, whatever. Hey, Jarrett, I'm going to cut everything off. That's what it sounds like. And then Shannon's like, yeah. And then Shannon's like, hey, man, I really appreciate that. Here's, I don't know, $1 million for letting me borrow that for that period of time. By the way, everything's back to normal. The sun went down. Everything's cooled off. I'm back at 75%. You can turn everything back on. And so that's basically how that agreement in very basic terms works is what curtailment is. And the reason that Bitcoin miners are unique, like I mentioned, you can't do that with AI data centers or cloud service data centers because 24/7 people are using that. It's very different for Bitcoin data centers because if we're not mining, we're not missing anything except for profit or not profits, but revenue, but we're still getting a different stream of revenue from the grid. And it's a perfect marriage where we help balance the grid where other data centers cannot.
That was perfect. That was perfectly said. Thank you for bringing in Shannon, the power man. And I think that this has been a good recap. But first of all, what is curtailment? Second of all, when does it occur, both in the hot and the cold? And then third of all, what does it actually look like when it happens at different facilities? And in my head, I was like, it can't just be like a text on Telegram, but actually maybe it is.
Sometimes it definitely is.
Okay, cool. Well, Tatum, thank you for hopping on the pod. It's always great to have you on here. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. Listening on a podcast platform, please subscribe. Be sure to follow us at Compass Mining on X, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Tatum, thank you once again for hopping on to talk about curtailment.
Absolutely.